Premier, thank you so much for your time today. Can I start with, on Friday night, police stood guard around a statue of Captain Cook in Hyde Park, and since then statues of former Prime Ministers have been vandalised in Ballarat. How much does it worry you that monuments now need to be protected by police?
Well, Shari, I wish it didn't come to this, and I want to stress that it's only a very, very small percentage of the population that's engaging in this activity. The vast majority of us don't condone it. We think it's disrespectful, it's un-Australian, and I just ask everybody to please know we are so privileged to be in a state and a nation of Australia. We have so much going for us, and respect and maintaining respect for our history, but also for our present is really important. I just urge everybody to maintain that level of respect.
In London, we've seen that the statue of the monument to Churchill was boarded up in order to protect it from protesters. Is that something that you're considering doing in Sydney so that the statues don't have to be under police guard?
Look, these trends globally are concerning, but Australia is different. We have great community spirit. We touch wood. To date, we've done very well in dealing with the challenges of the coronavirus. I think we've struck the right balance in giving people their freedom and easing restrictions whilst we've still kept the community safe. So really, if people feel strongly about something, please express your views in a respectful way, in an Australian way. Please don't denigrate all those people that have helped make us who we are today. And I just ask everybody for that level of respect. Again, Shari, I want to stress that 99.9% of our population have just been amazing. If our population hadn't stuck together, we wouldn't have been able to get the virus under control as we have in New South Wales. We had over 200 cases a day in March. That's how London and New York started, and we were growing. The number of cases were growing at the same rate as some of those cities experienced just a couple of months ago, and we've managed to turn that around. And that's not been because of government, that's been because of people actually respectfully following the health advice, following the guidelines. And I just ask everybody to really think about that community spirit before they act in that way.
Yeah, Australia has done an incredible job, and I think the majority of the population are very grateful to have the political leadership that we've had during this crisis. So, no, Premier, you have done an amazing job in keeping the cases and getting the cases low from that starting point. But look, just back to the monuments issue. You know, you said that if people have a different view, they should express it. Well, do you think there is an argument for, you know, from Indigenous Australians who say that some of these monuments cause them offence or upset? Is there an argument to relocate them?
Look, I think what we need to do is really appreciate what a depth of rich history we have. We have the longest surviving continuing culture on the planet right here in Australia. Our First Peoples, our Indigenous peoples, have the longest continuing cultural survival of any people on the planet, which is something we should be proud of. We should also acknowledge the role that colonial history has played in terms of developing our history. And yes, there are parts of that history which I know people feel strongly about, and I don't blame them for feeling strongly about, but we should be able to have those conversations. And of course then you think about our defence forces, our diggers who've really made Australia what it is, and that included Indigenous diggers as well as broader diggers, and of course our migrants, of which I'm a product. I'm the daughter of migrants, and certainly our migrant communities have also contributed to Australia, and we have such a rich depth of history. And yes, we're not always going to agree on how that's written up and how it's reflected, but I think all of us have, and most people have, displayed the maturity to be able to have these conversations. And I appreciate what Indigenous Australians are feeling and the struggles they have. And similarly, people have different views of history. That's okay. But I'm always someone who likes to deal with the facts, and I think we should have these conversations in a respectful way. And again, 99.9% of the population have been extremely respectful during this time. We don't always have to agree, nor should we. We are a democracy, and healthy democracies can demonstrate a diversity of views, and also perhaps revisiting those things that mean a lot to people. But having said that, I think what is really important is to do things in an Australian way, and that's through respect and through appreciating the democratic processes we have.
So when you say revisiting them or revisiting these things, does that mean there is a discussion to be had about whether some of the statues that cause particular offence to a minority, you know, should be relocated?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all, Shari. I'm not suggesting that at all, and I want to be very clear about that. I'm not suggesting that at all. They are parts of our history and they need to be acknowledged. But if people have a different view, that's okay, but express it in a respectful way, not in the way in which we've seen it happen in the last little while, unfortunately.
Well, the UK has announced a new law of 10 years in jail for defacing statues. Would you consider adopting harsher penalties here?
Well, I hope it doesn't come to that, Shari. I really don't. I hope people have taken stock of what some of their behaviour has been and what it's meant for people. It's horrible to know that wonderful Australians who have made such a huge contribution to our community have or potentially have that action taken against them. And I hope that doesn't continue, and I hope it doesn't come to that in New South Wales. But certainly if we need to tighten any laws, if we need to send a strong message to the community, we would consider that. But I really hope it doesn't come to that. I'm really appealing to people's conscience. I'm appealing to people's goodwill and saying if you have a view about something, express it in a proper way, not by disrespecting people who've made such a huge contribution to the place we are today.
Yeah. And Premier, what's your view on the cancellation of films and TV shows that we've seen over the past few days that has just really shocked and outraged people who were fans of things like Little Britain and Chris Lilly's satirical work?
Look, I'm really struggling with that. I think if things are done in a comedic or satiric way, it's really a comment on broader society. And I accept that people might at times feel offended from certain things, but I also feel that we need to be able to take what is an expression of society at a particular point in time. A lot of these things are done tongue-in-cheek. A lot of these things are done as a reflection or a comment on what's happening in the broader community. And I think of late it's been really interesting to see such a number of those things that many of us grew up with suddenly, be put in that category. I think times have moved on, and sometimes when I see something that I enjoyed watching when I was growing up, I do cringe. But does that mean it shouldn't be on air anymore? Does that mean it's not part of our history? I don't think so. Some things are cringeworthy after decades of time passing. And I say that knowing full well that some people might find offence at some of these things. But generally speaking, I think we should be a bit more tolerant of things which are done in a tongue-in-cheek, satirical way, without disrespecting, obviously, people who find offence. And, my family's been through, as I'm sure community you're involved with, Shari, my family's been through a genocide, and I know what words can mean. I know what words of hate can turn into. And I also know what discrimination means. But having said that, we also need to be able to take a healthy look at our society, be able to laugh at ourselves and in a tongue-in-cheek way, acknowledge perhaps things we've done that we shouldn't have done or things we've expressed in a particular way. And it's a fine line, but I think we should also appreciate that satire often brings us or wakes us up to acknowledging something that perhaps we shouldn't be undertaking.
Yeah. Look, on the protests, it has seemed like there's been one rule for the protesters and one for everyone else. There were only 2 fines issued this weekend, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any were issued or there were any arrests last weekend. Why should the rest of society continue to follow the rules on social restrictions and wait for them to be lifted? And you've just announced today that there'll be more lifted next month. But why should society continue to follow those when the protesters aren't following them and are not being punished for it?
Well, firstly, I'm relieved that the numbers of people who suggested they were coming out illegally yesterday and the day before didn't eventuate. Things were resolved in a peaceful way, which is what we always want to see. The weekend before, Shari, when we had those very large protests across the nation, we had an adverse appeal from the Supreme Court, which didn't deem that protest illegal, which is why the police action was limited. But obviously, on Friday and Saturday, police were able to control the situation, give adequate warnings and resolve things in a peaceful way, which is what we always want to see. Look, Shari, those people who are protesting against the health orders and against the law are a minority, but they are a minority which can impact the majority by risking the good progress we've made on health. And I just ask everybody, we appreciate how passionately some of you might feel about issues, but please make sure that you obey the law. We don't want to see New South Wales go backwards. We don't want to see your loved ones unintentionally fall victim to this horrible virus, which is very contagious. I mean, I have the benefit of getting health briefings on a daily basis, and when you go through some of the cases and learn how or where someone may have picked up the virus, it's really scary. It's extremely contagious and under certain circumstances can be very deadly, and people get very sick from it. To date, the vast majority who've had the virus in New South Wales have had the milder symptoms and not had to be hospitalised. But having said that, none of us want to be the reason why a loved one or a friend succumbs.
Absolutely.
And I just ask everybody to think of that, because even if you don't think about the broader unwashed community you might not know personally, just think about those closest to you.
Absolutely.
Imagine if you unintentionally gave the virus to them. It would just be a horrible situation.
Yeah. But just on how the restrictions are being enforced, restaurant owners and cafe owners say that police are coming in and doing a head count, and if there's a couple of extra people that shouldn't be there, they're being threatened with $50,000 fines. But then again, the protesters got off scot-free last weekend and this. Can you understand why the public feels that there's a double standard here?
Oh, look, I appreciate that people feel frustrated, but there's a reason why we need people to really respect and businesses to respect the restrictions. And I'm over the moon that 40,000 businesses have already downloaded the COVID Safe checklist we've put up through Service New South Wales. Can I say the response from the business community in New South Wales has been outstanding. The vast majority not only want to do the right thing, but they want to keep a good reputation and keep their patrons and their staff safe. So we really couldn't ask for more. The businesses have in general been outstanding, and from time to time they have regulators check on them for various things, and now we're making sure those regulators also are trained in COVID Safe to make sure all those businesses are doing the right thing. And I appreciate the frustration this brings with it, but the vast majority of people are doing the right thing. The rules are there for a reason. We wouldn't have been this successful and had so many lives saved had people not stuck to the rules, and so that's really important. I can appreciate the frustration when people see others not doing the right thing, but again, it's a very small minority compared to the vast majority who are really doing well.
Yeah. Look, we know we're in a national recession, and when you walk around the suburban streets in Sydney, you can just see the empty shops, that there have been, quite a high number of shop closures over the past few months during this shutdown period. Would you like to see JobKeeper extended, if not overall, but for some sectors beyond September? And is this a discussion you're planning to have with the federal government?
Well, Shari, the federal government, to their credit, was very vocal about how long they thought they could afford JobKeeper, and we need to be respectful of that. It's a major contribution, and that's why in New South Wales we've looked at the health data, but we've also looked at our economic activity, and we know that we have to work hard to get people back into jobs. In April alone, it's horrible to think about it, there's a story behind each one, but 221,000 people lost their jobs in New South Wales from the end of March to the beginning of May. Now, that is a horrible number. And we know that hundreds and thousands of others are on JobKeeper in New South Wales, and some of whom hopefully, or the majority of whom hopefully will be able to stay with their employer beyond that point. But we know that not all employers will be able to keep on all their employees. And that's why we're making sure that whilst we're keeping the community safe, we're also working hard to open up our economy as quickly as possible, which is why I'm aghast that some premiers think it's okay to keep their borders up. It just defies logic. If we're really serious about enhancing our economic activity, not just within our states, but for Australia as a nation, we need to be able to trade with each other and visit each other. And all states have done really well in managing community transmission. And the largest states, New South Wales and Victoria, especially Sydney, I mean, we've welcomed the vast majority of Australians coming back.
What about extra stimulus? Is that something you're looking at for those who are unemployed in New South Wales, or to encourage sectors to get back to work?
Yeah, well, we've already, through the Treasurer and various colleagues, we've already issued billions of dollars of stimulus in New South Wales, including direct grants to small businesses, including support for different sectors, assisting businesses in getting back to where they are, also having a call to action and supporting businesses who've been retooling and establishing manufacturing, especially in medical supply chains. And we're hoping that a lot of those supply chains will be able to continue. So whilst it's a very difficult time, as a government, we're also looking for opportunities about how we can stimulate stimulate further jobs through our infrastructure spend. We've brought forward a lot of our infrastructure spend. Our pipeline is still very healthy. We made sure that construction kept going during the worst times of the pandemic. And we also want to make sure that we increase that private investment. We know when government invests in infrastructure, the private sector gets that confidence to invest as well. So we have a huge job ahead of us, Shari, but I think we also have to expect that JobKeeper won't be there forever, and nor should it be, because our nation can't afford it. So I think it's incumbent on us as state governments to realise that and to do what we can to find a COVID-safe, steady state for our state. So, for example, as we're easing restrictions, we'll eventually get to a state where there's sufficient economic activity, sufficient stimulus, whilst we're keeping everybody safe. And we're getting to that point. We're not there yet. And I think all of us have to work towards that September timeframe, which the federal government had set for us.
Yeah. Premier, there's a report in the papers today that the Morrison government is looking at helping business figures fly into Australia without having to do that 2-week quarantine. What's your view on this?
Well, we would be a bit concerned about that at this stage, and I know the Prime Minister, through our discussions in National Cabinet, also appreciates how well the quarantine system has gone in New South Wales, but for perhaps 1 or 2 exceptions in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Every single new case has come from overseas travellers coming back home. These are Aussies who, for whatever reason, have left it late to come back home or have decided to come back home, and they're in quarantine. And Sydney has welcomed around 20,000 Aussies coming back home. Not all of them in New South Wales. We've actually kept them in quarantine on behalf of many state colleagues, on behalf of many states. We wouldn't see that change. We wouldn't want to see that change at this stage, because I think the quarantine has really helped us manage the spread, and it's made sure Aussies coming home from countries that are highly infectious. Interestingly, it's about 3 to 4% of people we test, Aussies who come back, are having the virus, which is quite high, which means they're coming from countries where the virus is very widespread. And of course, we want to keep our citizens safe. So I would support maintaining the current quarantine, but at some stage in the future, if we see that ease, of course, we can look at it. But I think it's a bit too early to do it now.
Look, just finally, Premier, on another topic, we've seen a couple of examples this year of people who've been awarded Australian honours and awards where there was some community unrest over the decisions. There hasn't been a review of how these awards are issued. These are Australia Day and Queen's Birthday honours for over 25 years. Do you think it's time now to do an independent review of the honours and awards process?
Well, look, I wouldn't be opposed to that. It's a process the federal government and their relevant agencies run. I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think anyone who receives that award, has the highest award our nation can give. It's very special. And if the federal government or the agencies felt that that was subject to review, I wouldn't stand in their way.